Hello, everybody. This is Mr. Combs, and I want to talk a little bit about character. Roberts and Jacobs define a character as a verbal representation of a human being. Basically, characters are the people who inhabit the story being told and carry out the action. And of course, characters are sometimes not people, right? They are animals in some stories, inanimate objects in some stories. Think about some of the Pixar films, right? That there are characters that are not people. But whatever the characters, authors strive to make them seem believable to the reader so the reader will connect with those characters and care about what happens to them. The best characters are vivid and complex. They deal with problems and experience triumphs that draw forth the reader's emotions and reveal some truth about humanity. Authors create such characters by giving them strong motivation. Motivation is very important. It is a force that drives a character to think, feel, or behave in a certain way. Many factors can motivate characters' actions. For example, the desire to succeed, the need for revenge, the burden of guilt or shame, or the hope of redemption, right? Motivation can be intrinsic or extrinsic. Intrinsic motivation is based on the internal values of a character, how a character sees the world, right? Extrinsic motivation is based on something outside, some outside force that causes the character to act. And I thought I would include this statement from a reader of a blog that I participate in. And I'm not sure who T. James is, but I thought that T. James's discussion of characters that are not written very well or do not have strong motivation was helpful to this discussion. So this is what T. James, who is I'm part of a blog where people read and discuss books and discuss reading. So this is what T. James said. One of the things that drives me bonkers as a reader is watching a character morph into something and someone else for the single and always obvious reason that the author needs the plot to go a certain way or a certain hole needs to be filled in the story. Done with skill, then it adds new layers and nuances to the story. In fact, how and most importantly, why they change becomes the story. Done badly, it leaves me with the question, why am I reading this, right? So I'm sure we've all read stories or watched television shows where we think the author sets up this world, or the writer or the creator sets up this world, sets up these characters, and then the character all of a sudden acts in a way that we're not prepared for, right? That sort of takes us out of the story. So that's the reason why motivation is very important. Because you don't want your reader to be taken out of the story. You want your reader to be um, engaged in the story so that the reader cares about what happens to the characters. Let's talk a little bit more about character motivation. Let's look at the characters of Gatsby and Belle. So Gatsby is from the Fitzgerald novel, The Great Gatsby. Maybe you've seen the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio or the older movie with Robert Redford. And Belle, of course, is from Disney's Beauty and the Beast. Both of these characters, I think, have intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So let's look at Gatsby. So Gatsby says, I have always wanted to be rich, but my main motivation in acquiring my fortune is my love for Daisy Buchanan. My acquisition of millions of dollars, purchase of a gaudy mansion on West Egg, and lavish weekly parties are all merely means to win Daisy back. So his intrinsic motivation is that he values wealth, right? From an early age, he values money, he values wealth. His extrinsic motivation is that Daisy married someone else, someone rich, and so now he needs to get her back. Likewise, Belle says, I have always longed to get away from the small town life and find something more. When my father was imprisoned by the beast, I had to do something because I care about my father very much. So I took his place as the beast prisoner. So Belle's intrinsic motivation is that she values family, right? So she's not just going to let her father um, be missing or be imprisoned. She values family, but then she also wants the adventurous life, right? She sees, this is a way, even though it's not ideal circumstances, this is a way for me to get out of this poor provincial life, right? Um, but then also her extrinsic motivation is that her father is lost, so she goes to look for him. She probably would not have left at that time if her father was not lost, if Philippe didn't show up, Philippe the horse, right? Um, and the beast imprisoned him, so she must do something about it. So let's practice a little bit. So we've had a couple examples, and now what I want you to do is think about this, and you might take out a scrap sheet and just sort of jot down some notes. And if you want to think about something, you might want to pause the video and think and write down some notes, and then see what my responses were to these questions. So it says, for each of the simple situations below, identify the actions taken by the character, then suggest some possible motivations for the character's actions in each case. So the motivations that you come up with may or may not be in the situation itself. You might have to infer a little bit here. So let's look at the first situation. Last week, Sam Smith replaced the family's breakfast cereal called Sweet Bits with 10 grams of sugar per serving with one called Trigrains, less than 1 gram of sugar per serving. At the supermarket today, he refused to let his toddler put chocolate-covered donuts in the shopping cart. So think about the actions that Sam took and what might be some motivation. What might be intrinsic motivation? What might be extrinsic motivation? You can pause the video if you want to think a little bit about it. Okay, so I hope you've thought about that. Let's take a look at what my responses were. So here are some possible responses. If you have different responses than me, that's fine. So the actions that he does, I guess, in this situation, is he replaces the family cereal with a healthier option, and he doesn't allow his child to buy chocolate donuts. So what could be some intrinsic motivation? He could just simply value personal health, right? He wants his kid to be healthy. Um, so that's inside of him, right? That deals with his values. What might be an extrinsic motivation? Well, he might have recently talked with a neighbor who told him that his child was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes, right? So that may have been the catalyst that caused him to think about the health of his own children. All right, let's look at the next situation. Mary notices and complains that mid-grade gasoline has recently risen 40 cents a gallon. Mary chooses to purchase a used Toyota Prius, which goes 54 miles on 1 gallon of gasoline, instead of a used Camry, which goes 27 miles on a gallon. So again, what is the action that is taken, and what might possible motivations be? You can pause the video if you need to. Okay, so I hope you thought about that. Let's look at some responses that I had. So what does Mary do? Buys a more efficient car, right? Instead of when she goes to buy a new car or a new to her car, she buys a Prius, which gets better gas mileage, right? More efficient. What might be intrinsic motivation? She's always been a frugal person. She's always been a person who wanted to save money. So that comes from within inside her. But the very fact that gasoline prices have risen may have caused her to buy the more efficient car, but then also perhaps that she had just taken a new job that is further away from home than the one she had before. So she's going to be driving more, so now she wants a more efficient car. So remember that motivation is very important. And as you read stories where we focus on character this week, make sure you think about the motivations of characters and think, well, does this motivation um, or does the character act in a way that the author has set up that character to act? And if the character acts differently, why is that so? So, according to Pickering and Hopper, characters can be categorized using three basic criteria. The first criteria is their relation to the action of the story. The second one is the degree to which they are developed. And the third is whether or not they change significantly throughout the narrative. So, categorizing characters based on their role in the story. So, there are major characters and there are minor characters in stories. The major or central character is the most important character in a story. Now, there may be more than one major character, right? This is the character the plot revolves around. Sometimes this character is called the hero or heroine. Since the actions of this character may not always be heroic, however, often this character is more neutrally labeled the protagonist. So basically, the protagonist is the character in the story that we focus on, the character that we have the most interest in. Works of fiction can have more than one protagonist. Short stories usually have only one or two. So if we have a protagonist, then we also sometimes have an antagonist. And the antagonist is a character or characters um, opposed to the protagonist. The protagonist and antagonist are connected by the story's conflict. And we often consider the antagonist a major character of the story as well. And then we have minor characters. They are not as important as the major characters, but they still play a part in the story. Their actions help drive the story forward. They may impact the decisions the protagonist or antagonist make, either helping or interfering with the conflict. So let's look at some examples. Jurassic Park. Scientists and kids, protagonists. Dinosaurs, antagonists. There are other antagonists in those films, I know, but the dinosaurs are the major ones. Luke Skywalker from Star Wars, protagonist. Darth Vader, antagonist. Cinderella, protagonist. The stepmother, antagonist. Norman Bates from Psycho, if you've seen the film Psycho, he is the protagonist. He is the person that we're most interested in. He's not a very good character, right? He's not the hero, but he is the character that we're focused on. He's the protagonist. Marion Crane and Lila and Sam Loomis and Lila Crane are the antagonists. They're the ones who are against Norman. Notice, like I said, protagonists aren't always the good guys. They are simply the focus of the narrative.